Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. This is our Leveraging Easy Language series. Today, we're going to talk about drawing trend lines. It's a topic that we've done before, but I thought that we should revisit the idea, talk about some of the simplicities around drawing trend lines, and some of the simplicities and also some of the more complicated stuff. I don't think the topic of drawing trend lines is something easy on TradeStation. I think I've said this before. I've said that sometimes it gets complicated, and the way that you can get a drawing, the way that you can get a trend line drawn on a chart is not the easiest thing. But we're going to take a look at all the functionality, everything that's part of the TradeStation language, and you be the judge. You be the judge of if it's something that you want to use or not. So let's go ahead and get this class started. Welcome everyone to class. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities. I'm glad that you're all here. And before we get started on drawing trend lines, let's go through some of the disclosures. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only, that it is not a recommendation of TradeStation. Also, that active trading is not suitable for everyone, especially if you're trading options and futures. They carry a higher degree of risk because they're leveraged products. And also, past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. We need to be aware of the risks, and the link right there at the bottom of this PowerPoint slide, it's a link that provides you additional information on these disclosures, tradestation.com/important-information if you want to go there directly, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Trend lines in easy language. Let's talk about this. Sometimes I feel that it is very interesting, that you're able to write some code and have the TradeStation platform draw a trend line. I think that's impressive, and that's something that if you want to do programmatically, that's great, especially if you're calculating, the beginning and ending points with certain calculations that require easy language. That's wonderful. A lot of times, drawing the trend line manually, sometimes it's even faster and easier. But I do see a lot of reasons why someone would want to, draw these trend lines programmatically. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on easy language, reserved words, and easy language functions that allow you to not only draw them, but also modify them if you need to do so. First of all, let's talk about some trend line elements so that we know exactly what to expect. Trend lines can be drawn from any study or strategy. And this is really interesting because a lot of times there are some reserved words and functions that only work in a certain type of easy language document. For example, plot one. It's a reserved word that only works on indicators. If you try to use the word plot one in a strategy, it doesn't work. But all the reserved words and functions that we're going to take a look at today, at least the ones that are related to trendline, can be used in both. It can be used in studies, and it can also be used in strategies. Trend lines are programmable drawing tools that can be added to the chart through easy language. We already said that. We said that we're going to use easy language to draw the trend line programmatically. And we're going to do it from a very simple standpoint. So we're not going to do anything crazy. I just want you guys to understand how the functionality works and what things you need to pay attention to if you want to draw a trend line. The price and other information from hand-drawn trend lines can be referenced through easy language. Pretty cool stuff here. When you draw a manual trend line, there's an ID that gets tied in with that trend line that can be referenced in easy language. Not only the ID, you can also reference the prices that are along that line. Pretty cool stuff. We'll go over to TradeStation in a moment, and I'll show you how you can get the ID and some of that information. Trend lines are anchored to a bar, date and time and price on both the x-axis and the price y-axis. It's interesting that we remember that because, yeah, they do need a beginning point and they do need an end point. So those are the two anchor points of the trend line, and that's that's what determines the slope. If it's uptrending or downtrending, or if it's a horizontal line or a vertical line, the line is always going to be anchored to 2 points. And you can choose whether that line is going to be extended to the right or extended to the left. I mean, those are optional things on any trend line. But as long as we remember that we need 2 anchor points to draw the trend line, we're going to be good. And when you draw the trend line, there's certain elements or data elements that you have to supply for these anchor points. You need a date, a time, and a price for each one of the anchor points. Of course, date and time will tell you which bar the trend line is going to be anchored to, and the price will tell you exactly where that anchor point is going to be located in that axis. So that's the beginning point of that trend line. It needs 3 data points. And you also need an additional 3 data points for the second anchor point of that trend line. And that way, these 2 anchor points determine in which direction the trend line is going to be drawn. Trend lines are not part of the chart scaling process. Something really important to remember. A lot of times we may think that something's not working because we don't see it on the chart. But remember, if the trend line is being drawn using prices that are not within the chart scale, you won't see them. And this is really something that you guys need to remember, especially when you're using trend lines on TradeStation, even manual trend lines. In fact, let me go ahead and switch over here to TradeStation to tell you exactly what I mean by that. All right, so here we have the price activity for Apple. This is a daily chart of Apple. But let's say, for example, that we want to draw a trend line from this, let's see, from this low to this low. So I'm going to go here to drawing. This is manual drawing, so it's not easy language. I'm going to go here to trend line. I'm also going to make sure that I have snap mode on so that it snaps to the low. I'm going to go from this low to this low. So notice that I drew my trend line. It seems like my trend line, I set it up so that it doesn't extend to the right. I think by default, trend lines will extend to the right. So let me go ahead and right click on that trend line, and I'm going to extend right. So that's a setting on the trend line that you can turn on or off. The first thing I want you guys to understand is the anchor points. Notice that on the line, I have different white boxes, but 2 of them are larger than the others. That's they're rather than dots, they're kind of little squares. So 2 of those little squares are larger than the others. Those are going to be your anchor points. You can move them to any other location. That determines, the direction in which the trend line is going to be extended. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out also is that if you click and hold on the trend line, first of all, you get the trend line ID. If this is the first trend line you draw on a chart, it's going to be trend line number 0. But you also see that it has a begin date, a begin time, and a begin price, an end date, an end time, and an end price. So what we said earlier, that any trend line needs 3 data points for the beginning and 3 data points for the end, it's true even for hand-drawn trend lines. So more so for a trend that you have to draw programmatically, you have to think about those 6 data points you have to supply. The date, time, and price of the beginning point, and the date, time, and price for the end point. Talking about scale, of course, I drew the trend line right here within the scale of this chart, and that's why I'm able to see it. But now, if I change my chart to, well, first of all, before I change the time frame, I want to check the date of the anchor point, because my trend line anchors on October 13th of last year. And that's important to remember, because if I switch my chart here to a 30-minute chart, I don't see the trend line. Okay, I don't see the trend line. The reason why I don't see the trend line is because I don't have enough historical data. Remember the anchor point of the trend line that I drew? The anchor is attached to a date of October 13th. So if you don't have that date in the history of this chart, in this example, it won't have a date to anchor to. So you have to make sure that if you have a trend line that anchors to a specific date, that that date is part of the historical, at least the historical amount of data that you've selected for this chart. So let me go ahead and load 6 months of data here. There we go. As soon as I added more data to include October 13th, which is the anchor date of the trend line, I kind of see a little bit right there at the bottom. I don't see the full extent of the trend line because remember, the trend line is not part of the scale. I'm able to see it because it was just a coincidence that when I drew it, I was crossing some of the prices that are visible on this 30-minute chart. But if I extend or increase the bar spacing, it gets to a point that I don't see the trend line anymore because, as I said before, it's not part of the scale. So when we go back to the PowerPoint and we see that radio button that says trend lines are not part of the chart scaling process, that's exactly what we mean. So you may not see the trend line when in reality it is there. You just probably don't have the anchor points visible on the screen, or the scale on the right-hand side does not include the prices to which that trend line is anchored. Things to remember. Each trend line is assigned a reference ID number regardless of how it's created. You saw that when I drew that trend line, it had a number of 0 assigned to it. Trend lines can be adjusted after they're drawn. That's something that we talked about too. And the way that you adjust the trend line is, well, if you want to do it manually, you have to click and drag the anchor points. But you can also adjust the trend line programmatically, and we're going to take a look at what reserved words you have to use to do that. The color and the size and other properties can be set programmatically as well. Multiple trend lines can be drawn on a chart based on criteria. So the code that we're going to see not only works on just one trend line. I mean, programmatically, you can have multiple trend lines appear on the chart. You can also, as I said before, you can change the size, you can change the color, you can change the extension, you can move the chart, you can move the trend line around. All that can be controlled by Easylanguage. So how do we create the trend line on the first place? Well, this is the syntax. By the way, I forgot to share with you the PDF. Let me go ahead and do that. That's my PDF for this class, and it provides you all the information that I have that I'm showing here in this PowerPoint. So the new trend lines are created with this reserved word TL_new. Every time you type that into an Easylanguage document, it's going to turn blue because it recognizes it as a reserved word. The way that it's built here is we are storing the trend line in something called value 1. Value 1, if you've been using TradeStation for a while, is one of those pre-declared variables that we can use in Easylanguage. And you need that. You need a variable to store the trend line. We're using value 1, but you can create your own variable if you want. We're going to look at an example where we do that, but you can use value 1 as well as a temporary placeholder, or if you want to use it for as a permanent placeholder, that's up to you as well. But the interesting thing here is that once you use the word TL_new, inside parentheses, what's going on here? Inside parentheses, you have a bar date, bar time, bar price, and then it repeats again, bar date, bar time, bar price. Why is that? Because we said it at the beginning. You need 3 data points for each one of the anchor points. And how many anchors do we have to a trend line? We have 2. So in order for Easylanguage to draw any trend line, it needs 6 data points. Where it's going to begin and at what price, and where it's going to end and at what price. Okay, so always remember that. And that's just a simple, that's just trend lines in the simplest form. Next. Okay, TL_new must be assigned to a numeric variable and will return the TLID if the trend line was successfully created. Yes, the reason why we have to store the creation of the trend line in a variable is because that whole line of text that you see up here, what it returns is a number, which is the trend line ID. So that's going to be stored in that variable. For example, you have one right here, value 1 equals TL new. Notice that we have the date, time, and the low of 10 bars ago. So we're using a historical reference. And then we're using date, time, and low of the current bar. Okay, so let's go ahead and before we even use that in Easylanguage, we're going to do a very simple example on TradeStation. You're going to see the results that you get with slight modifications. Let's go ahead and finish the content here on this PowerPoint, and then we'll move over to the development environment to do some testing and do some exercises around Easylanguage trendline creation. First of all, let's talk about the words, the reserved words that you can use to move the trend line. So to move a trend line, we have the same kind of syntax structure. The word starts with TL underscore. So TL underscore new is to create, TL underscore set begin, and TL underscore set end is to change where the anchor points are. Notice that in set begin, you have, first of all, you have to tell it what the ID of the trend line is. This TL underscore ID is not a reserved word. I mean, this could be value 1. You just have to supply the variable that is holding the ID of the trend line. In this example that you see here in blue, TL underscore ID is just a user declared variable that's holding the ID of the trend line. Why is it needed? Because the set begin and the set end reserved word need to know which trend line to change, which trend line to adjust. I mean, you could have a study that's drawing hundreds of different trend lines on the chart. So we need to tell Easylanguage which one by their ID is the one that we want to change. And then after that, you supply the 3 data points for that anchor. The begin anchor and the end anchor are set separately. And that's why you have the 2 lines of text here. I mean, you can choose to just adjust one of the anchor points. That'll change the slope of that trend line, but you can also change the 2 anchors if you wanted to do so. To remove a trend line, this is the reserved word TL underscore delete. And inside parentheses, of course, you have to tell Easylanguage which trend line to remove. And we know that we have to reference a particular ID. And for formatting the trend line, we have the reserved word to set the size and set the color. Again, inside parentheses, you have to tell which trend line ID. Is it the one you want to modify? And inside parentheses, the second parameter, it's either the size of the color you want to use. For size, we know that the number is from 0 to 6. And this matches very well the thicknesses that you see when you format a line. And you can do that in TradeStation at any moment. If I go here to TradeStation, if I double click on that trend line that I see at the bottom, and I go to the style, when I go into the weight, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I have 7 different thicknesses that I can choose from. And that's exactly what this PowerPoint is referencing. 0 to 6 gives you a total of 7 thicknesses. And you have to put in that number inside parentheses for the thickness that you want the line to have. And color, it's pretty much the same. You just have to supply the color. Now, I'm very, I mostly use one of the colors that are part of the, I think it's 16 colors that Easylanguage has created. And we have a name for them like cyan, magenta, or yellow. I sometimes use dark yellow or dark red if I'm using a lighter color background. But when we talk about color, you have access to the RGB function. RGB is a color palette. RGB stands for red, green, and blue. And there's a certain number combination that produces a color. Now, RGB is not something that Easylanguage invented. This is something that exists in color palettes. All sorts of software use it, and we just introduced it here in Easylanguage in case you want to find a color that is not already, created as a name. You have access to all the different 16 million colors available by using the RGB function. Okay, that's a a totally separate conversation, but you can use, the standard colors, yellow, white, red, blue. Those are already created as a word, and you can put it right there inside the set color, the TL underscore set color, as one of the parameters to set the color of the trend line. So far, so good. Everyone understands, everyone follows me. Perfect, because we're going to jump over to the development environment to do some coding. Before I do so, this is my last slide. The last slide on the PDF is just a reminder of the things that you have to do to create a study, like open up the Easylanguage development environment, select study type in the file new many sequence, give your study a unique descriptive name, sometimes use a prefix so that it groups everything together. You write your Easylanguage code, you verify the code and fix any errors, if any, verify again, and last, apply the chart to visually validate. There's a couple steps that I'm missing here, like check the properties of the study. And I didn't put them here because a lot of times when you draw trend lines, it's not really necessary for you to adjust the properties like scaling, especially if you're doing things programmatically, like setting the color. But if you are going to properties to change the color, the style, and everything about that trend line, then actually that's the whole point. The whole point of why it's not here is because the style and the color that is found in properties doesn't really do anything to trend lines. This is more designed for like plot lines. When you have a MACD or a moving average, yeah, those styles and colors are set in the properties. But remember that a trend line is not a line that you plot like an indicator. A trend line is using the drawing mechanism in TradeStation. It's more like a drawing tool. And that's why when you want to change the style or you change the color, you have to double click on the line and format it as if it was a drawing tool and not an indicator. So something to do on TradeStation. And once you see it on TradeStation, it'll make a lot of sense. But the PowerPoint or this slide is right there to just give you a reminder of the steps that you need to follow and make sure that you verify that code to make sure that you can use it on TradeStation. Let's go to my TradeStation platform. Let me cancel out of this. Let me remove that trend line that I drew manually. Let me squeeze the chart and turn it into a daily chart. All right, so daily chart of Apple right here on the screen. Let's go ahead and start our Easylanguage and see some of the things that we can do. I'm going to come over here to, I don't have the development environment open, so let me go ahead and do that. Apps, Easylanguage. I may already have an indicator called drawing trend lines, but we'll see. I'm going to do a new indicator. This will be called exclamation JN drawing trend line. Okay, I'm going to click OK. Okay, I didn't have an indicator with that name. Exclamation JN, those are my initials, and they're grouped together with a lot of the custom work that I've done. So I'm going to put that code that we saw in the PowerPoint. If you guys remember, I'm just going to use this syntax right here. This example. Let's put it right here on the Easylanguage code and see what's going on. Let me go over here to my Easylanguage. Let's do value1 equals, make the font a little bit bigger. I think I had it on 20 before. That way it's easier for you to see on your side. Value1, we're going to do TL underscore new. And I want you guys to notice that as soon as you type in TL underscore new, it comes up in blue. We say this in every Easylanguage class, but everything that comes up in blue is reserved to the language. It's called a reserved word. It knows exactly what it means, and you know that you did it right. You typed it right. You know, a lot of times we may confuse the underscore with a hyphen. If we do TL hyphen new, notice that only the word new comes up in blue, not the TL part. So this is not what you're looking for. So make sure that you're using the underscore new, and the whole expression has to come up in blue. Okay, so we already explained that in order for you to create a trend line, you need 6 data elements. First of all, the date, time, and price that the trend line is going to start at, and then the date, time, and price that the trend line is going to end at. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do the date first. And as the example that you see in the PowerPoint, I'm going to do 10 bars ago. We know that if you want to do a historical reference, you put that inside square brackets. So date, 10 bars ago, time, 10 bars ago, and the low, 10 bars ago. And my next 3 data elements are just going to be date, time, and low. You can add spaces in between if you want to, just to make it a little bit more readable. I'm skipping the spaces, so it's just a little bit more condensed. I'm going to close here with parentheses and end with a semicolon. Is that what it's here in the PowerPoint slide? It sure is. Okay, so we're storing that trend line into value 1. And we don't have to plot the line. Remember that this is the way that the trend line is created. So there's no need for you to say plot the trend line because it doesn't work that way. Once you have the TL_new, that's just an instruction for Easylanguage to draw the trend line. But I want you guys to see what this looks like on the chart. I'm going to verify this. Okay, notice that there's no errors. Everything verifies correctly. And I'm going to come over here to my trade station and put it on the chart just as is. Studies, add study. And I'm going to go here to exclamation JN. Drawing trend line. Oh, you know, I take back one of the things that I said at the very beginning. I said that we didn't have to change the properties of this study. It does draw the trend lines where they should be, but notice what happens right there at the bottom. It creates some sort of a subgraph. Why is that? Because by default, indicators open up a subgraph at the bottom. That's the default scale. So let me remove the study. I want to press delete here. Whenever you remove a study, you know, I'm used to clicking on the line and pressing delete on the keyboard. So right now, if I click on a line and I press delete on the keyboard, it kind of knows that this is not an indicator. This is a drawing tool. This is a trend line. And it says the drawing object was added by a study or by a strategy. Would you like to remove the study that created the object? If I say yes, it's going to remove the study. But it's just confirming that what you want to remove is the study and not necessarily that single piece of line that I clicked on. Okay, so let me go back here to my code. What I'm talking about here is going to properties, going into the scaling, and you can see that by default, these indicators are designed to go in their own subgraph. But I want to set this at the same axis as underlying data so that it doesn't create a division on my chart. It just assumes that it's going to go right on the bars. I'm going to click OK, verify one more time, and let's go back to TradeStation and put it on one more time. So JN, drawing trend line. Okay, so this is the way that it looks. Yes, it is cool. It's kind of funny because it's maybe it's not what you expected, but remember that when we write Easylanguage is going to start at the very beginning of the chart. So let me scroll back and open up the chart here. So on the first bar, nothing's going to happen. But as it starts building the bars, this line right here that I'm clicking on, it goes from here all the way here. On this bar where right here, this one is February 19th of 2020. On this bar, it was able to calculate the indicator and say, all right, I'm going to create the trend line using the low of 10 bars ago, which is this bar, to the low of the current bar. And it just drew that very first line on the indicator. If I click and hold, this is trend line number 914. The second trend line is 915. I'm not sure why it's Maybe because I did other things here on my trade station. Maybe because I remember that this is it's just keeping track of all the trend lines that have been drawn, I think, on this session. When I say this session, I'm just talking about my last login to TradeStation. Then I think it resets. But all the numbers are going to be sequential, but every new bar, the trend line is adjusted because that's what we told it to do. On every bar, draw the trend line 10 bars back. On the new bar, then it draws the trend line 10 bar back. So if I go here to the very beginning, and I look at the very most recent trend line, let me just click on it. Okay, let me just click here and hold. That's trend line number 1,985. The trend line is updating. You see, it's going from the current bar to 10 bars ago. So we can modify this code a little bit. For example, if we only want TradeStation to draw the most current trend line, I can do the following. If last bar on chart, then, so with adding this is the function, by the way, it comes up in magenta. It's last bar on chart. So if we tell the Easylanguage this, we're just instructing, just wait until the last bar to calculate. And that's exactly what it does. Instead of calculating from the very beginning and drawing every single trend line from that point forward, it's just going to wait for the last bar. Let me verify this. And if I go back to TradeStation, I only have one trend line from low to low, current bar to 10 bars ago. Okay, the way that it is though, it'll start from this bar going forward. So tomorrow, when a new bar is created, tomorrow's bar is going to be the last bar on the chart, and then it'll just draw another trend line on my chart, unless I reload. Every time you do Control R, the indicator gets reloaded and redrawn. So if you have multiple trend lines drawn because you haven't refreshed the chart lately, Control R refreshes, redraws, and it follows your instructions again. Okay, so that's a way for you to recalculate the study. Any questions so far? I'm not sure how many of you use trend lines in your Easylanguage, but this is the way to do it. If I go over here to the way that I've set up my my code, if I use the low, see, I'm not using the low of 10 bars ago, I'm using the low of the current bar. If you use the low from one anchor point to the other anchor point and make it the same price, you'll have a horizontal line. Let me verify that. Go back here to TradeStation and notice what I have. Okay, because you're not using the low of 10 bars ago. The low is the same price on both points, and that's why it draws that horizontal. Just to give you a little bit of understanding on how TradeStation uses the data for those anchor points. If I go back in here and I say, well, instead of doing that, I want to do the following. I want to do the high, but on the same date and time. Take a look, date and time on the same bar, the high to the low. So what will this create? It'll create a vertical line. Let me verify that. Go back to TradeStation, and here you go. It's a vertical line from high to low. If I want that line to extend, I can set it as a default, or I can do it programmatically. Do you guys remember what we do? We do TL set extend right. Notice that it turns blue. So that's just the confirmation that you did it right, that you typed it in correctly. If you spell out the word extend, thinking that it's the whole word, notice that it doesn't come up in blue. So you have to double check your spelling. So it's set EXT for extend right. And inside parentheses, we have to supply the ID for the trend line. Where is the ID of the trend line? Well, it's stored right here in value 1. So I'm going to do value 1, and I'm going to set this to true. And I'll do the TL set ext left comes up in blue for value 1. I'm going to set that to true. Let's verify. So now when I go back to TradeStation, I have nothing. Okay, so what's going on here? This is extend right, extend left. So something didn't work here. Something did not work here. Maybe it doesn't work for vertical lines. Maybe. Let's see if we do 1 bar go for this and verify it now. So let's see. Oh, let's do something. Let me go ahead and do something. Maybe I know exactly what the problem is. Let me go back here to my code. Okay. Maybe it's because I've set this as a condition as well. So it runs through the code once. Let's do a begin here, then begin so that I can have an end right here. And it's not part of the if then condition, And let's go ahead and remove those historical references and verify it again. No, it's still not there. Did we lose the study? Let me see, edit studies, still on. So what is the problem here? Maybe high to low. I'm looking for a vertical line. So let me make it the same one here. TradeStation. So maybe vertical lines are a little bit different in the way that they extend. Let me go back here and say underscore 10 bars back. Let me do this for the 3 data elements of the starting point and take a look at my chart again. Not even. So let me reload. So I'm adding these. Value 1. Let me take this last bar. Okay, let me put this below. Sometimes the order of operations has a big impact. No, not even so. Let's comment these values out. That gives me my trend line, but if I want to extend right, for example, so if I want to extend right, let me put that over down here. Let's verify. That just clears it. That's really odd. That's pretty odd. Because I've used it before this way. Does anybody see the problem that I'm not seeing? Maybe. Maybe let me put that inside the begin. Maybe that's what's happening. It needs to apply to the trend line within the code. Okay, there we go. So that was my problem. So last bar and chart just calculates it on the last bar, and your preferences or your styling need to be inside of that. So what best way to learn Easylanguage than to test things out? I always say this, there's no better way to learn Easylanguage than to start writing it and see if it works or not. So let me verify that. There we go. Let's see what we were trying to do though. It's a vertical one, right? So if I do this and I go from high to low, let's see if this works. There we go. Now we have our vertical line wherever we want, okay? All these data points, by the way, can be elements that you can input or that you can enter as inputs, so that you can have a way of formatting the study and saying, okay, I want my trend line from this date to that date and make it work, okay? Well, let's go ahead and work on this a little bit more and give you some other variations of this. Let's talk about identifying. Let me remove this line. So do some calculations so that you can set the date or the beginning date and the beginning end programmatically. And what we're going to take a look at is looking at significant lows. So we're going to draw a trend line from one significant low to another significant low. Something that catches my eye is this low with this low. So what we're going to do is try to capture those two lows and any other lows in history, So because this will just identify those significant lows. So what we do is we come over here to the code and we're going to have to create some sort of counter. And I want to set up a counter so that it keeps track of not only how many bars ago a significant low happened, because that'll be a reference point. If we know one of the anchor points and we say, well, tell me how many bars ago the other significant low happened, then you have the two anchor points. So bars ago is going to be more like a historical reference to know where the prior significant low was. But we also need to keep track of the number of significant lows we get, because we only want to draw a trend line once we have two significant lows. If you have one significant low, that's not enough. You don't have the anchor points for your trend line. So these are two counters that are going to be happening on this code for you to identify these significant lows. By the way, I did not create this code. This is just something that I'm stealing, but I want to go through the code with you guys so that we can make it work and see if we can make some sense out of it. Let me remove this block statement. Let me remove this too. I'm just going to leave the creation of my trend line, and I'm going to use something or a variable for this. Instead of using value1, let me declare that as my custom variable. And a lot of times you're going to see in code something like TLID. TLID, by the way, is not a word that's part of the language. That's why it doesn't come up in blue. I'm using the same structure as TL_new, but TL_ID doesn't exist. And I can use it as a variable. So I can take this and replace value1 with TLID. That way, anywhere I see the word TLID, I know that it's referencing the ID of the trend line. Does that make sense? Because value1 doesn't really tell you much. That's one of the pre-declared variables. So that's one of the reasons why we always recommend for you to create your own variables, because they'll make more sense not only to you, but anybody who's reading your code, okay? So we're also gonna keep track of two counts. So I'm gonna call this trough, or maybe just the word counter. I just want to be a little bit more descriptive. Is that how you? Yeah, I think that's how you spell trough. So I'm just trying to count the number of trough. So that's going to be a counter. Trough count. Okay, and then we're going to have bars ago, which is going to be another counter. All right. So here we're going to do the following. We're going to set the bars ago to start the counter as soon as it's applied to the chart analysis. So as soon as it goes on the chart, it's going to keep on adding to this. So bars ago equals bars ago plus 1. And if we do get a significant low, I'm going to reset the counter to 0 so that when I do establish that significant low, I start on 1 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, starts every single bar. When you get the second significant low, you'll have a counter of how many bars ago it happened. Because on the first one, you reset it to 0. So it starts counting up. So on the second significant, you can just say bars ago, and it'll fall exactly on that original, significant low. So what we're going to do, identify what the significant low is. If the low is less than the lowest low, let's say 10 bars ago. So we're going to look at the low and make sure that it's the lowest low of 10 bars ago. So when we look at the chart, we're looking for this type of scenario. So it looks 10 days back, and the low that you're looking at is the lowest low of a particular, collection of days. Hopefully 10 days is enough to identify those significant lows. But at the same time, I want it to be a pivot low. So not only do I want the low to be the lowest low of the last 10 bars, I also want the price to come back higher. So I want the low to turn higher so that it's considered a pivot. A pivot, you have some bars on the left-hand side and some bars on the right-hand side that, in this case, that are higher, so that you have a pivot low. Does that make sense? So when I go by here to the code, I'm really not looking at the current low. I'm looking at the low 1 bar ago. Why? Because if I want to get confirmation that the low has increased from that pivot, that's the bar that would be my current bar, the one that I'm confirming that pivot, that bounce from the bottom. So what I'm looking at is the low of the bar ago to be the lowest of the bunch. But then again, I have to reference here 2 bars ago. Why am I referencing 2 bars ago for the lowest? Because if I just leave it the way it is, it'll count the current bar, and that's not where I want to count the lowest, because that's the one that constitutes the pivot. I also don't want to count the pivot low, because the condition will never be true. I want the 10 prior bars to be higher than my pivot low. So I have to go 2 bars back to start the counter to measure where the lows are of those previous 10 bars. Hopefully this makes sense. And as I said before, this piece of code that I'm sharing with you has been tested and has been verified. And at the time that it was written, of course, it generated a lot of errors. And that's why we know exactly where to put the historical references. And that's an exercise that you're probably going to have to go through when you're writing your own code. You're writing something and you say, well, that doesn't look right. And then you start figuring out why. So we've gone through the testing, we've gone through this, and that's why it's easy for me to say here, I want to reference the low of 1 bar ago and understand exactly why. So read this code, study it, and it will make much more sense. So I'm looking at the low of the prior bar, making sure that it's the lowest one for the past 10, and that the low of the current bar, this is where we identify that pivot, the bounce, the low of the current bar is greater than the low of 1 bar ago. So the low is increasing. You get that pivot, then begin. Whenever you have a begin, you need to have an end. So I'm going to make sure that I have that end in there, that way you don't forget to put it in. When it finds the first significant low, I want the trough, let's call this pivot low count. It just makes more sense to call this pivot low count and trough count. Pivot low count. So pivot low count is going to be equal to pivot low count plus 1. That's where it says, okay, I found 1. So whenever it finds that significant low, this will be 1. So every time that it finds 1, it'll just increase the number by 1. Does that make sense? We want to draw the trend line only when we have 2 or more. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is what I'm going to have. If pivot low count is greater than or equal to 2, then that's when I want to draw my trend line. Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to take this trend line right here that I'm creating, and I'm going to put that up here. We'll do some modifications here in a little moment, okay? And that's fine. Let me verify this and see if it works. Okay, it does work. Let's take a look at how this looks on the chart. Okay, it's not showing me anything. Let's take a look at what's going on. Oh, I know why. Because of the way that I drew the trend line. So if we have, I didn't modify the way that the trend line is built. So I want this, the date. Let's see. So if pivot point low count is greater than 2, then I want to go from date bars ago minus 1. What does that do? Bars ago plus 1. What does that do? Bars ago, remember that this is the counter that is being started right here. The reason why is that we didn't reset it. So just looking at some notes here, we have to reset it back to 0 when it finds the pivot right here. So this right here, when it finds the significant low, let's go ahead and do that. It needs to reset. Remember that I said that at the very beginning? So we need to say bars ago equals 0. So at this point, if it finds a significant low, we're going to draw the trend line from, this bars ago right here is keeping track of the counter. Okay, so bars ago plus 1, and we're adding the plus 1 because we are always looking at the low of the previous bar, right? So the conditional statement that we've created, we have shifted it 1 bar back, and that's the bar that we're adding here because the bars ago needs that shift as well. Let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to do that for the date. The time needs to be on that same bar. And here, we're going to change the low and say the low of bars ago. And the date and time here is not going to be on the current bar. Again, we have to account for that shift. So here, we're going to have 1 bar back. Let's see if that works. All right, so I'm running here off the screen. Let's verify this. All right, so I need a semicolon right here. There we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at the code. All right, still don't have anything here. Let's look at the code and see how we can fix it. So you that have, some more expertise here, let's see. We have a begin. We have an end here. So let's see. We're looking at the low, date, time, and low. So everything looks good. So if our pivot low count is greater than or equal to 2, then we have our statement here. Let's do, I don't need a begin here because it's, I only have one action. That shouldn't be a problem. Unless No, that still doesn't give me anything. Unless you know trendline ID, let's take a look over here. Lowest low of 10 bars ago. Then begin. Pivot low count equals pivot low count plus 1. So when the count is greater than or equal to 2, then I draw the trend line. So we have a begin, 2 begins, 1. Can't figure it out. Can somebody do? Control R. So do I have the study in there? I think I removed the study. That's don't tell me that all this time that I thought the study was not working was because I didn't have the study in the chart. And that is exactly the reason why. If I go here to studies, notice how edit studies is grayed out. So I didn't even have it on the chart. So I'm sorry about that. Let's go ahead and add the study and put it right back in place. I think I removed it last time so I could start from scratch. This is funny. So, but it did allow me to take a closer look at the code and go through the logic one more time. So let's go here to the exclamation JN, drawing trend line, and click OK. All right, so this seems to be working. Okay, at least I have some trend lines. One thing that is happening here though, and it kind of looked at this and connected to this low right here because it was the lowest low for the past 10 bars. So it's not really connecting the 2 lows that I really wanted. So maybe I need to increase the strength here. And notice also something. This is also drawing downward sloping trend lines, which is something that I may want to change. So this is connecting low to low regardless of which direction the trend line is going. And if we're looking to identify some support levels, maybe we don't want any downward, sloping trend lines. We can fix that very quickly right here in the code. If we say, okay, if we have 2 pivot lows, and we're going to say, and the low of 1 bar ago. Remember, we're always looking at the pivot low, which is the previous bar, is greater than the low of what? Bars ago plus 1. We're using that same structure that we're using right here for the anchor point. So we want to make sure that if you're looking at the 2 anchor points, that the more recent one is higher than the last one. This will take care or get rid of all the downward sloping trend lines. Let's take a look. And here we go. Notice how it removed those downward. It only draws a trend line when it's upward. So again, if I want my line to be connecting here rather than here, maybe I just need to come over here to the pivot and make it a little bit more restrictive. Let's make this 15 instead. And there we go. That made it, go to the 2 points that I was visualizing. I didn't really want this one, so I had to increase the strength of that pivot. So that, 10 or 15 that I hard coded in there can probably be, declared as an input, so you have the flexibility of moving those lines around. Okay. Perfect. That's an exercise in itself. We can change the color, change the style programmatically. I think we talked about that. If you don't set the color, if you don't set the width of these trend lines, it'll just use whatever default value you've assigned to the trend lines. But if I come over here and I change that, let's say that I'm going to come here once once it draws the trend line, I'm going to go here, TL underscore set extend right of TL underscore ID to true. TL set size of TL ID to, let's do 4. TL set size of, set color of TL underscore ID, and we're going to use cyan. Now we can do all that. I'm going to verify, and this is the way that it looks. Of course, if you choose every single trend line to extend to the right, it looks funny, but every single trend line that is drawn is just extending to the right, which can help you on the current line, but that would require additional code. But that extend right is something simple to do. I can comment it out so that I can see the size on the color applied to my chart. All right. Let's see, what else can I show you here? No, I think we ran out of time. So we did run out of time. So I wanted to give you a little bit of, some information around drawing trend lines. I think we did that, showing you how to apply some of the reserved words and some of the functions. We didn't look at any functions. There are no functions. I believe there are no functions associated with trend lines specifically, but we did look at all the reserved words that are associated with drawing trend lines and modifying trend lines. One thing that I want to tell you is that we have built-in studies in TradeStation that are already written that draw trend lines. One good example is one study called Trendlines Automatic. It doesn't use this core Easylanguage code. It uses objects, so it's a newer way of looking at trend lines. You can take a look at that code to see a little bit more flexibility when it comes to drawing these trend lines, okay? But guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me. Hopefully it was fun for you too, and I hope to see you in a future session. Remember, tomorrow we have Ask the Experts at 11:30, and then we have our regular masterclass session at 12:30, where we're going to be highlighting company research and internet research links. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.